1988, I cut grass at $10 and $15 a yard all summer to afford my own NES. In August, while I was visiting family in Atlanta, I walked into the KB Toys at the South Lake Mall off Mount Zion Parkway and plopped down my $150 for the action set. Seeing that I had $50 left over, I bought my first NES game, Bionic Commando. I got home, hooked the system up, tossed the Mario Duck Hunt cart in the corner, and booted up my new game. 2 hours and several deaths later, I destroyed the Albatross, blew up Hitler, and saved Super Joe. I did not get angry at this. I didn't call Nintendo and accuse them of being con artists. I didn't try to take the game back for a refund. But you know what I did do? As soon as the ending was over, I started the game back up and began questing for the perfect Bionic Commando speedrun. I still have the game sitting on my shelf right now. I have never regretted spending $50 for it, nor for any of the other numerous NES, Sega Master System, Genesis, SNES, TurboGrafx-16, Sega CD, 32X, 3DO, Neo Geo, PlayStation, N64, Saturn, Dreamcast, GameCube, Xbox, PlayStation 2, Wii, PlayStation 3, or Xbox 360 games that could be beaten in under 5 hours. You'll notice I didn't mention the Jaguar. That would be because it sucks otter balls. Last year, in my review of the Xbox One, I voiced several complaints about one of its launch titles, namely Rise, Son of Rome. One of those complaints was that I was able to complete the game on medium difficulty in about 4.5 hours, and that included the time it took to watch all the cutscenes. Looking back on it, I still feel somewhat jaded about that, as the multiplayer was dumb as fuck and added nothing to it for me at all. I went into it expecting a campaign of God of War length, and what I got was 4.5 hours in combat that relied heavily on dodge thrust mechanics and quick-time events. What had changed in me between 1988 and 2013? It wasn't that I was now spending my own money and hence expected more for it. I bought all my NES games with my own money. It wasn't the $10 price difference. I paid well over $60 for several SNES and Genesis games in the 16-bit era that weren't near as long as Rise, Street Fighter II and Valis 3 being just two examples. Hell, there were several early Genesis games that were $70 each when the system first launched. The more ROM the cart had, the higher the cost. So why did it matter to me now? Was it possible that the 7th generation had spoiled me? Had games like God of War 3 and Uncharted made me care more about the movie-like spectacle and bang for my buck than whether or not I'd had fun? The Order 1886 is a hard game to classify because it blends a number of different genres. It's 3 parts third-person shooter, 1 part stealth action game, 1 half-part Tomb Raider style platforming, 1 part Beyond Two Souls style point-and-click adventure, and 3 parts Sega CD style interactive movie. The story is an Elseworld steampunk affair taking place during London's Victorian era, and concerns itself with the Order, a secret society that had its beginnings with King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. They are tasked with protecting humanity from all the ghouls and ghosties of European legend, which of course in this world are all too real. To honor their roots, each member of the Order takes on the name of one of the original Knights of the Round Table. You play as Grayson, who has taken on the title of Sir Galahad. You and your fellow knights are armed with a unique array of weaponry and gadgets provided by Nikola Tesla, who in this world is the weapons and gadgets master of the Order, and not simply Thomas Edison's arch-rival. Also in the Order's arsenal of goodies is a silver vial they each wear around their necks, which contains the essence of Blackwater, aka water from the Holy Grail, that heals most injuries and, short of being beheaded or otherwise utterly destroyed, grants immortality. The story itself is really good, very enthralling. I've loved both European monster myths and the legends of King Arthur and his knights since I was a kid, and I've loved steampunk fiction since I was a teenager. Add to this the fact that I was also an avid comic book reader all the way up until my own son was born, so the story instantly brought back memories of some of my favorite Elseworld graphic novels, particularly Batman Gotham by Gaslight. In short, the story seemed almost custom-made for me. But it's not perfect. The game begins almost towards the end of the storyline, in the events that lead up to the final 2 chapters of the game, in fact, where we see Galahad has been imprisoned by the Order for some grave offense. This actually spoils one of the main plot points of the whole game, as the moment I saw that, I knew that the Order was corrupt, had bad guys on the inside, that Galahad probably found this out and had been set up to look like a traitor, and knowing that werewolves were in the game, the knight who set him up was probably a werewolf himself. Then the game flashed back to the beginning of the story, and we shortly meet one of Galahad's fellow knights, Sir Lucan, adopted son of the Order's leader and adopted brother of Lady Igraine, Galahad's former love interest. Anyone who notices that Sir Lucan sounds a hell of a lot like Lycan will figure out the plot's two major twists within the first hour of the game. So it's not bad plot, it's bad structure. The whole in media res bit of starting the story in the middle should not have been done here. It adds nothing to the story other than to try and start the game off with a bang instead of 30 minutes of plot building that happens at the start of Chapter 1. Uncharted 2 employed in media res too, but doing so gave nothing of the plot away, unlike here. In a story with plot twists, Ready at Dawn should have started from the beginning, and perhaps started the story with a prologue, something exciting to get the blood pumping and get you yanked right into the middle of the story. Like maybe a werewolf attempting to break into Buckingham Palace in hopes of eating the Queen. You see the Queen going about her business, you hear screams of guards down the hall being slaughtered and various howling animal noises. The door flies off its hinges, the Queen screams, the werewolf lunges at her, and then a bolt of electricity fries it in midair, and its well-done corpse hits the ground. The camera swerves to see one of the Order, with smoking arc gun in hand, standing on the balcony. The Queen breathes a sigh of relief and thanks him for his help. He salutes and says, "Smoke me a kipper, I'll be back for breakfast," and then a title shot leads right into a God of War-style opening scene laying out the Order's backstory using medieval-era moving tapestry art. Done! That would have kept one of the two major twists fairly safe until well into the game. And for God's sake, whoever picked out the name Sir Lucan should have weak old spotted dick smooshed in his face and be forced to wear it around the office all day, because holy shit. Now, without a doubt, The Order 1886 is the best looking game to ever be on a console, hands down, leaving Rise Son of Rome and infamous Second Son tied for second place. The environments are just dripping with atmosphere. Anyone who was a fan of the recent Sherlock Holmes films or the Johnny Depp Jack the Ripper film From Hell is going to love the level design. The character models are breathtaking, the facial animation is realistic and emotive, the lip sync is perfect, the clothing has actual texture, the weapons look like they have real weight with brass fittings that shine in all the right places, nighttime is foggy with eerie moonlight piercing the veil. It's just all tremendous. The graphics are so good, in fact, that several times a cutscene ended and Galahad just stood there for several moments because I didn't realize I was back in control of the character. In many ways, it's just that seamless, folks. In fact, I never noticed a single load time. Every scene just seems to lead directly into the next, with just a spinning circle on the corner being the only indication that any loading or saving is going on. The music is everything I hoped it would be. Brooding, bass-heavy orchestral score, with ominous operatic background vocalizations lending both an epic and old-world tone to it all. It's not on the memorable level of the music from games like Uncharted or Skyrim. You're not going to be humming it under your breath like you did with those games, but it perfectly matches the tone of each scene as needed. Now, to the gameplay. First off, everything works as designed. When the scene calls for jumping or climbing walls or any other number of Uncharted-like activities, the controls work flawlessly. If you're in a quick-time event you'll never lose because the game didn't recognize your button press, you just fucked up. When you go into a stealth area, you just stay out of their lamplight and line of sight until you can sneak up behind them for a stealth kill that works like a charm. Which isn't to say that all the stealth areas are easy. There's one in particular towards the end of the game where you're in a garden courtyard at night. It's a large area with hedges that could easily block your view of the guards and the light from their lamps. I died twice just trying to get past it. When you're in a gunfight, the aiming is spot on. With auto-aim shut off, I was able to pull off headshots with the same ease I could with Nathan Drake. It's very accurate. The gunplay, though, is more in the style of Gears of War than Uncharted. It has that slower, weightier Gears feel to it. Enemies will stay at their posts for a while, but if you stay put too long, they'll come looking for you and try to flank you if possible. In these cases, you can pull a quick melee kill or you can go into Black Sight, a slow motion mode similar to that in the Fear series where you can pull off a quick succession of shots on multiple enemies. It's powered by a Black Sight meter in the lower right corner of your screen under your ammo counter and refills from shooting enemies. You also have access to grenades, and of course there's those glorious guns like the Falchion, which has an air blaster that stuns your enemies before you riddle them with bullets, or there's the thermite rifle that sprays the enemy with thermite powder that you can then ignite with a flare, setting your foe and everything around him on fire. Then there's the arc gun that electrocutes anyone or anything that gets in your crosshairs, sometimes blowing them up into powder. All very accurate and a hell of a lot of fun to use. There's a real, almost giddy, childlike 80s action thrill to spraying a whole group of enemies with thermite and hitting them with that flare, causing a massive explosion of those who are still in one piece run about on fire screaming in agony. And of course, because they're already on fire, you don't have to use another flare. You can just hit them with another cloud of thermite and that'll ignite off the flames on their skin. So the gameplay itself is as perfect as it could possibly be. It's the ratio that's off. It goes without saying that if you're playing a game touted as a third-person shooter, and you go 3 hours into the game before finally earning a kill this many enemies with the so-and-so rifle trophy, something is a bit off. Don't get me wrong, the gunplay sequences in this game are fantastic and for the most part are lengthy and highly satisfying. There's just not enough of them. The action does escalate once you get further into the game, yes, culminating in a firefight in a dark tomb-like area that's preceded by an open room that has all the weapons in the game laid out for you to just go nuts with. You can grab the arc gun, go electrocute some redcoats, run back out, grab the thermite rifle, set them all on fire, and so on. But the reality is that you spend about 3 hours of this game's playtime watching the story unfold in cutscenes, picking up and examining letters, pictures, and newspapers that add nothing to the gameplay, some more time picking up audio recordings that you can only listen to from the main menu rather than having them play during the game and add to the actual plot as you experience it, like in BioShock, even more time doing simple lockpick electrical rewiring and turn this wheel to unblock your path puzzles, and would you believe it, even more time doing QuickTime events that can be anything from help this person push a cart to kill the fuck out of this werewolf Kratos style. In fact, even the last boss fight of the game is a hand-to-hand battle that's a mixture of an Uncharted 3 style melee fight and a Beyond Two Souls QuickTime event style melee fight. Sure, some of the best games ever made have used some or all of these elements, Uncharted being the best example, but Naughty Dog understood one thing that Ready at Dawn didn't seem to quite grasp. Story is key, but there has to be balance. Yeah, Uncharted has a lot of story and a lot of cutscenes, but it mixes that up with numerous puzzles, platforming sequences, stealth sequences, and lots of action-filled, fast-paced, and lengthy gun battles. The Order has all of that, but not enough of the gun battles, and the gun battles it does have are spread too far apart, with too much time spent on non-interactive cutscenes in between them. One personal side note to Ready at Dawn, a minor quibble about tone. If you're trying to set up real controller-squeezing terror, like walking through a dark, spooky, abandoned hospital, give the player regular, full control. None of this shit where you can only walk, not run, and you can't pull your gun. Because if the game prevents you from pulling your gun, the player knows that nothing is going to leap out and attack you, because you can't pull your gun. Conversely, if the player walks through a long hallway, unable to pull out their gun, and then the character does so automatically, the player instantly knows that something is about to jump out and attack, so once again, you've killed the surprise. Food for thought, Ready at Dawn. Moving on. Add to that the fact that this was a game that heavily touted the supernatural aspects of the enemies, namely the werewolves. I found it fairly surprising that there really aren't that many werewolves in this game, and 2 of the werewolf fights you do get into go down in the exact same way. You're in a dark room cluttered with objects that partially obstruct your vision. 2 to 3 werewolves are stalking you. They attack you one at a time. You shoot them in the face as they're coming towards you, hit X to dodge when prompted, then shoot them in the ass when they run away, and repeat this process till the triangle appears over their head, watch the death animation, then do the whole thing over again until all the werewolves are dead. The other 2 werewolf encounters are quick-time event battle scenes, including the aforementioned last boss fight, and both of them go down almost exactly the same way. Short of one brief cameo appearance of another infamous monster type, that's all you get. 99% of the enemies you fight are either rebels dressed like the chimney sweeps from Mary Poppins or redcoat guards later in the game. The story focuses more on these rebels against the crown than it does the werewolf menace, though as I've hinted, the two become more closely intertwined as the story goes on. Hopefully, if the game sells well, the sequel will focus more on the monsters, less on the human enemies. A mix of both in each gunfight would be epic, which isn't to say that the gunplay we do get isn't great, it is. But don't build up hype for your game by making it out to be immortal Knights of the Round Table with sci-fi guns versus monsters, when the monsters are mostly side characters up until the end of the game. That's not bad design, that's bad promotion. Also, considering Ready at Dawn made a name for themselves with the God of War games for PSP, which both had some fun, unique, and clever puzzles in them, I think they could have broken up the story a bit more by incorporating those types of puzzles here. That's really the biggest and only major flaw of the game, aside from the in media res plot device that gives away too much plot at the beginning. The core story itself is fantastic. Yeah, it has a cliffhanger ending, but it's more like the ending to The Dark Knight, leaving the hero to live out a lie imposed upon him and cut off from his companions, teasing what's next to come, especially the brief mid-credit scene, very Batman-esque indeed. Than the ending to The Empire Strikes Back or The Matrix Reloaded. No, the problem is that it gives you too much of the story at once. It needed a couple more epic gunfights and maybe a good puzzler or two, maybe even more frequent trips back to Tesla's lab, and instead of just being presented new guns, you have to find components during the game to help him build them for you, to spread the story out more evenly, which would have gone a long way. In short, if not for that, the order would have been to the PS4 what Uncharted Drake's Fortune was to the PS3, and this would have been a much different review. And that brings me to the elephant in the room, the game's length. I'll state this flat out first. I played the game on normal difficulty. I only stopped to pick up collectibles if they were right in front of me, and I only picked up items to examine them when the game forced me to do so. I died 5 or 6 times during my first run. Twice during the ballroom scene in Chapter 5, 2 or 3 times during the garden stealth scene I mentioned earlier, and a couple more times towards the end. From starting scene to closing credits, it took me right at 8.5 hours to complete the game, a far cry from the 5 hours that was being tossed around in the media. I need to stress here, there are no complete the chapter trophies in this game. Almost all the trophies are collector trophies or kill so many enemies with this gun trophies. So I was 3 hours into the game before a single trophy popped. Hence, you can't go by the timing on trophies to determine the game's length. Secondly, having watched the infamous playthrough that's now been removed, I have 2 observations. 1, enemies were going down for him with fewer shots than they were for me. So I expect he had the game set to easy and probably had aim assist turned on, which is the default setting, whereas I'd gone in and turned it off before I started. Even so, by the time he hit Chapter 11, he had already had 5 hours of playtime built up, and it takes a good deal more than 30 minutes to finish Chapters 11 through 16. In short, the 5.5 hour estimation is bullshit if you're playing on anything other than easy. Depending on the difficulty level, it'll take you somewhere between 7 to 10 hours, possibly 12 if you're playing it on hard and are having issues with it. Still, that doesn't change the fact that about 3 hours of that playtime is cutscenes and QuickTime events. And if you're a trophy hunter, you can tack on another 2 to 4 hours on top of that, depending on whether you did any item hunting and a lot of weapon swapping during your first playthrough. My first thought when I looked at how much time it took me to beat the game was, well, see, the 5 hours was bullshit. Then I thought, but only 5.5 hours of it was actual shooting, and my thoughts towards this review started to lean in the don't buy this shit direction. But then I thought back to my initial impression of Rise, and I looked over at my game shelf and just ran my finger past so many titles I've played over and over and over again that I initially beat in under an hour but paid $50 for. Aside from the god-awful Call of Duty games, had I ever actually regretted buying any of them for their length? And then I started looking at some of the best reviewed games of this generation, like Bayonetta 2, which I beat in 6.5 hours, including watching all the cutscenes. Did I regret buying it because its campaign was even shorter than The Order? What mattered more, how long the game was, or how much fun I had while it lasted? And if it's the former, is that the fault of the game itself, or the fault of our priorities as gamers having changed, or a little bit of both? To sum up, The Order 1886 is the best looking game that's ever been on a console, has wonderful music, tight, responsive gameplay, a fantastic if self-spoiled story with a couple of minor tone problems, phenomenal voice acting, and above all, it's fun. Not only in the gameplay, but in an 80s summer R-rated sci-fi adventure movie on a hot June day before going to the water park kind of fun. It just needed a little more actual gameplay to spread out the narrative, and depending on how engrossed you get in that story, you may or may not even notice the long gaps between the gunplay. Still, in my opinion, it brings it shy of the instant classic that it could have been, the next epic Sony franchise that it could and should have been. I wasn't disappointed by the experience itself, I just wish there was more of it. It left me wanting more. I view The Order 1886 not as a resounding success, but rather a mostly successful title full of potential, a prologue to what it can be if it becomes a series. And that Dark Knight-inspired ending, where Sir Lucan was basically Harvey Dent and you were Batman, really left me hungry for more. It's not the game that we wanted, but maybe it's the game we deserved. The Order 1886 gets a 5.5 out of 7.